All right. Good afternoon, everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started. I want to thank everyone for joining us today to learn more about the SEEA Regional Landscape Analysis Project. My name is Renee Sterned, and I'm the chair of the Southeastern Environmental Education Alliance. Also presenting today will be Ashley Hoffman, the executive director of SEEA and the Kentucky Association for Environmental Education, as well as Lauren Pyle, who's the Environmental Educators of North Carolina Executive Director. Ansley Eichhorn is our incoming chair for SEEA, and she is serving behind the scenes with tech assistance. So if you have any issues, feel free to message her in the chat. And we have built-in pauses and plenty of time for questions at the end of each main section with our presentation today, which will give you a chance to unmute and ask questions. But please feel free at any time to put your questions into the chat, and we will be monitoring those as well. So I'll let Ashley get the slide presentation up. Great. So I just wanted to really set the stage about who the Southeastern Environmental Education Alliance is and what we do. So the early idea of regional affiliates was explored during the North American Association for Environmental Education's conference in Georgia in 1998, and the interest was really high. Southeastern state affiliate leaders who were part of the Environmental Protection Agency's Region 4 continued to informally meet at NAAEE conferences, and in 2004, these informal leadership level meetings were open to members of the Southeastern states as well. Momentum around the need to join together continued. And in 2012, the first regional conference was held in Kentucky, where the Southeastern Environmental Education Alliance was officially organized as an NAAEE affiliate and as a collective of the 8 Southeastern states in EPA's Region 4, and all of those are listed here. Since that time, SEEA has grown from a disconnected volunteer network in 2012 that only had 1 paid staff member across the region to where we are today in 2022, which is really a cohesive team of state programs, 5 of now which have executive directors, and 5 that have some other level of year-round paid staffing support, as well as numerous successful funded projects and collaborations across the region. Next slide, please. And just to reiterate that kind of nested structure between the state affiliates, NAA and SEEA, I'm a very visual person. So we have the 8 individual affiliates of NAAEE. And so again, those are all listed across the top. And we have also formed a regional affiliate that's known as the Southeastern Environmental Education Alliance, which is also an affiliate of NAAEE. So it's a very nested structure that we have. Next slide, thank you. So SEEA really wanted to explore what it would look like if we were to pool our own resources as a region. So we started by sharing a part-time executive director. At a regional leadership retreat in 2014, a work plan was crafted to outline the actions that SEEA states would undertake to begin building a regional hub to support our state networks. It was determined that SEEA really needed someone to keep the group on task. We were already a network of volunteers trying to build our own statewide networks with different levels of success. So we drafted a proposal for a regional partnership where each state would contribute $1,000 a year to support an executive director for SEEA. And as Kentucky was the only state that had staff in place at the time, it was determined that the proposal would be to buy some of that executive director's time. The idea of sharing resources had begun, and that first year, 6 out of 8 states signed on, with all states joining by the next year. Since then, we have shared numerous other resources and have been able to strengthen our region much faster and more efficiently than would have been possible if we had continued to work in our own individual silos. So we have annual regional conferences that are hosted by a SEEA state, which brings more attendees and networking opportunities to their own state conferences. We have sharing of resources, and this includes staffing, mentoring, tech memberships, webinars, and leadership retreats. And the big one is really funding. We continue to successfully fund regional projects that help build individual state capacity from funders, including NAAEE EE360 grants, EPA regional grants, the Pisces Foundation, and the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation. This funding has led to the development of online courses like the Justice, Equity, Diversity, Inclusion 101 online training, and the development and distribution of the Don't Waste It curriculum as just a few examples. This funding has also allowed every SEEA state to hire and pay staff, either on a per project basis or to increase overall staff hours. So this is a formal agreement that the SEEA states have signed onto. We work collectively and collaboratively to help build capacity and demonstrate the power of collective impact. We like to call this building a bigger boat, as one of our former SEEA chairs was very fond of saying. And like I said, I've already mentioned that some of these efforts that have been supported by this collaborative regional partnership. Next, please. So SEEA's role is to really serve as a field catalyst and to build the field of environmental education across the Southeast. We work behind the scenes to help our member states build capacity to ensure that the boots on the ground, those people doing the environmental education in their respective states, have what they need to do their job better. And looking at the environmental education field across the Southeast, SEEA has helped affiliates move from phase 1 to phase 2, and we are gearing up to move on to phase 3. Over the past year, we have been working to better understand how we can accelerate our impact by conducting a landscape analysis of environmental education already happening on the ground and at the state level, which will enable our states to identify gaps and barriers that prevent successful implementation of EE programming in some areas. And this is what we are here to share with you today. So there are numerous organizations providing high quality environmental education programs across the Southeast. Most of these were operating independently of one another, and historically little has been done to harness the collective impact of these programs to create large scale change in each state or throughout the region. These realities made it very difficult to sustain projects in the long term and to extend the impact beyond our local communities and organizations. To really move into the phase 3 of that field change, which is the evolving and sustaining phase, SEEA really needed to tackle some really big questions about the field of environmental education across the region. And in order to do that, we needed to better understand the field. So what does environmental education look like on the ground? How do we work together to strengthen EE in the Southeast? And what would a stronger and more inclusive EE movement look like? A landscape analysis of environmental education efforts in the 8 SEEA states would provide some baseline data and understanding of EE across the region. The SEEA Landscape Analysis Project, which is funded by the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation and the Pisces Foundation, will provide regional environmental education providers with the resources and tools to more effectively meet the needs of their communities. It will help us ensure that we are focusing our limited time and resources in the areas where we will have the biggest impact. It will provide formal educators the tools they need to connect with providers in their area. And it will allow EE providers to target their efforts in the areas with the highest need, whether that need is demographic, geographic, or content-based. And again, we are so excited that you are here to learn more about this process, the tools that have been created from this data, and some of the key findings that we have discovered. So next, we're going to have a little video. Great, thank you so much. So SEEA went through a really intensive survey design process and received survey responses from 646 organizations that provide environmental education in the Southeast. In conjunction with the release of the dashboard, which we're going to be sharing with you today, we also reopened the survey and have had about 20 more responses that will be added to the data pool. And if you are a program provider in one of the SEEA states and you do not see your organization listed, you can still provide your data for the landscape analysis by visiting southeasternee.com/survey. And I will put that in the chat in a moment. The SEEA Landscape Analysis Survey was designed with the SEEA Landscape Analysis Coordinators with input from EcoRise, who had done a smaller scale survey in Texas and Louisiana. The University of Texas assisted SEEA with the design of the dashboard and the maps. And I want to really acknowledge everyone that helped with this incredibly huge project and helped it come to fruition. So the Pisces Foundation and the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation for funding and their continued support and input on the project. All the work of the SEEA leadership team, the state affiliates, and the SEEA Landscape Analysis State Coordinators. Vanessa Morel, who served as our strategy consultant on this project, and Leslie Berger for all their hard work helping the state coordinators to craft survey questions and rolling out the survey at the state level. And also a big thank you to Second Nature Trek that helped complete the data analysis, and the staff of the Kentucky Association for Environmental Education for all of their hard work behind the scenes, making wonderfully designed templates and videos for the states to use in crafting the initial rollout of all this information to our states and nationally. And so with all of that groundwork laid, are there any questions before I turn it over to Ashley to discuss our initial findings? And thanks, Ashley, for putting that in the chat.
No problem.
I don't see any questions in the chat, but I'm looking for some raised hands. Or you can unmute yourself and ask a question right now if you have one.
All right, no problem. We can always circle back to any questions at the end as well. So we'll have plenty of opportunity. So thank you, Renee, for that great setting the stage for all the findings. And all right, so it's my job to get to share all the amazing things that we found out. So we're celebrating some pretty amazing strengths for our region, and we're excited to share those with you. And again, we did reopen that survey, so we've now had over 650 providers respond. But in the initial process, we did have those 646 providers across the 8 states who collectively reach over 2 million youth annually and over 16,000 schools, and collectively have almost 80,000 volunteers, which was pretty exciting. So of that 2 million youth, they're primarily reached through direct teaching and field trips. And the majority of our programming we found was geared towards elementary age students. Across the region, we're also seeing a lot of the same language and the same themes that are being used to talk about our work. And the demographics of our students and educators served is reflective of the region. So as a region, BIPOC representation, which is Black, Indigenous, or person of color, is about 29%. And the percentage of students that were BIPOC served was actually 49%, and educators was 37.9%. And also just want to share that there's amazing work happening on very limited budgets. So a quarter of the respondents work with less than $100,000 budget, and over half are working with budgets that are under $250,000. So we're doing amazing work with really limited resources. And so some of the opportunities that we highlighted were that while the demographics of the educators and the students served might be reflective of the region, we did find that the staff, senior staff, and board leadership of our providers was not representative of the overall demographics. And I'll talk about that a little bit more shortly. In a comparison study, in a comparison of starting salaries that we studied for similar fields, environmental education was found to be lower than all three comparison fields. So the average starting salary for environmental education reported in our survey was $29,500 for a full-time position, which compared to the average for education was $35,000, for forestry was $39,000, and for hospitality and tourism was $37,000. So again, a huge opportunity there to work on more equitable pay. And then, and we do plan to release some more guidance around that in the future through SEEA. And while we found a high number of programs provide direct teaching and field trip opportunities for elementary students, we did see a lot of opportunity to increase those opportunities for early childhood and high school students. We also found that environmental education program evaluation was often limited. So so we have some plans to release more guidance around that as an area for growth for our providers. With our mapping tools, we were able to identify geographic gaps in services across the region. And these fell predominantly in rural areas, areas with high social vulnerability index, or areas with the lowest income. It was a little bit more challenging to determine demographic gaps, which was something we had hoped to do. The majority of organizations indicated they do not collect this information. So that was an area of growth we identified as well. So we plan to reach out and share more about the value of collecting this information in the future and how we can use that to inform the work we're doing at the field level. So I want to jump into those specific findings, and you'll be able to access all of these charts and graphs in a few minutes. Lauren will show you how to do that. But let me show you what our regional findings were, and then you can actually go in and figure out how to find specific information for your state if you're more interested in the state level data. So while our data varies somewhat from state to state, we found that the predominant program themes in the region were conservation, outdoor learning, biodiversity, water, and STEM, respectively. In Florida and Mississippi, marine and coastal understandably ranked in the top 5. And in North Carolina and Tennessee, we actually saw natural history rank in the top 5. And we asked this information to better understand what was happening on the ground, to help facilitate collaborations across programs, and to better understand where there might be gaps in program content. And so in a minute, Lauren's going to show you how you can use this information to connect with providers doing similar work. We found direct teaching and field trips to be the primary offerings from the providers we surveyed. And this was asked to help us get a baseline understanding of what tools are out there. And then we also looked at the sector and who makes up the sector. And you can see there that almost half the sector is nonprofit. We also looked at the audience served. So again, most of the audience served was K-5, and then a little bit less for 6-8, and then we went into general public in the 9-12. And we also looked at what were the terms that people were using for their work. And that was really, there's a lot of different ways we describe the work that we were doing. So trying to better understand, was environmental education the primary terminology people were using? Was it outdoor education, conservation education, that type of thing? And we did see overwhelmingly that environmental education is the predominant term used, followed by outdoor education, conservation education, and nature-based learning. We also wanted to better understand what the opportunities were that were out there. So we asked questions about things like program time, and we found that the majority of programming is happening during the school day, followed by summer. And then we looked at, what kind of evaluation are people doing? And the majority of our respondents were doing some sort of qualitative or informal evaluation or a post-program survey only. And so there's, some opportunities there to really come up with a more robust evaluation system. We wanted to know how often are programs being designed in collaboration with teachers. And so we found that was happening about half the time, or that a lot of folks, didn't track that information. And then the majority of programming is happening off the school grounds. There was a significant number that are doing virtual, and we wish that we could have had data prior to COVID to see how much that might have changed in the last couple of years. But this gives us a baseline to work from. We wanted to better understand how frequently programming is being correlated to academic standards. And so we asked questions around, is it being correlated to standards? Which standards are you correlating to? And science came up, as the highest. Obviously, it's often the easiest to make the connection to, but we see a lot of opportunity there for showing how environmental education can be interdisciplinary and how we can correlate it to other subject areas as well. And then again, that organizational budget information that I shared earlier, the majority of our organizations are working with a very small, less than $250,000 budget. So circling back to BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, or person of color, we looked at, we have a region that is 29% BIPOC. And of the organizations that responded, we found that 7% of full-time staff fall in that category, as well as 6.5% of senior staff. And this demonstrated that we have some work to do in our states towards having our leadership better reflect the demographics of our region. And then the same thing with board leadership. So just 8.6% of board leadership identify as BIPOC. We also asked about Title I participants in programs, Title I schools, and this, you can see there that over half of respondents don't track this data. So we weren't able to do a whole lot with this information. So kind of going back to the issues we ran into with demographic information, we weren't really able to assess how many Title I schools were being reached just due to the huge number of respondents who weren't tracking that information. And then I did mention earlier that the students and educators we serve exceeds the regional breakdown of BIPOC audiences. But as with the Title I data, most of our providers do not actually track that information. So you can see here for students served, over 50% don't track that, and a huge number don't track educators. The problem with that is while we did exceed the regional average, we expect that our data is probably skewed because the people responding, was such a small proportion of the whole region. So this highlighted for us that there's a need to provide, again, more guidance on the value of tracking that demographic information. And without this information, we can't truly know if our programs and our providers are reaching all audiences. So we'll be working on releasing some information to hopefully address this in future versions of the survey. So do you have any questions about our findings? If you do, you can feel free to unmute or share in the chat. And if not, I'm going to turn it over to Lauren, who's going to go through the most exciting part, which is the tools that you can use on your own.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. I have a question. This is Susan Fields. I teach virtually for the Rock Hill School District in Rock Hill, South Carolina. And I'm wondering if there was any kind of conversation about the possibility of environmental science becoming a required lab science for high school graduates now that it's gaining popularity in high schools, because not everybody is going to be using chemistry or physics. I'm not knocking those, I teach chemistry, but right now I know in most schools in my area, it's used as an elective. They put anybody in there. And we just want to know, we tend to do more hands-on things in there than we do in other classes. So I just didn't know, is that something that y'all also were keeping track of, or would you keep track of in the future?
That's a great question. Thanks, Susan. So we are actually working on our phase 2 right now, which is a survey of schools and school districts. And so I think that that's a great question that we can share with the writing team that's working on that part of that survey. And then
Yeah, hi. Had a quick question. In terms of the findings, in terms of like demographics that were being reached, I saw that there was general audience, but I might have missed it. Was there a separate section for like purely adult audiences? And was there any data on that?
I think I can't hold on, let me see if I can go back to our screen. I think that we kind of lumped those together, but let me check. So we did look at educator, like adult educators, so pre-service, and then teachers and administrators, but we did not separate out other adults who were not educators. We lumped that into the general public category. Any other questions? Okay, and we will have time at the end as well if you have additional questions. So I'm going to turn it over to Lauren.
Exactly. Because yeah, as Ashley just showed you, all the findings she just presented were looking at the regional level. But what might interest you here today on this call is what's happening at your local level, whether that's your state, your county, or even your community. And so on the SEEA website, which the address is on the slide there, we built a hub that will help you answer so many different questions. It can help you find other EE providers near you. It can help you find new networks. It can help you identify local gaps and opportunities for access, explore the demographics of your region, connect with other educators, find partners and filter and export some nice spreadsheets, model it in other places, and do a lot more. And so I'm going to walk you through two of the main tools that you might use to answer some of these questions. So the first one is the Field Trends Dashboard. So all the graphs that Ashley showed you today, if you're like, I want more graphs, I want to see the tiny letters that were there, you can get your own. And so what you can do for that is go to the dashboard. This is what it looks like here. And we have tutorials about how to use the dashboard and the many different ways that you can filter it to get results on the hub. So you can filter at the organizational level, at the program level, or some combination therein. Do you want to know what themes are most common in our early childhood programs in Kentucky? Or say which organizations are working at the local level that are using external evaluators? You can just click the filters on the left-hand side to see the charts and the maps change as a result of your question. If you want more data about who those organizations are, you go, okay, so I filtered, I've got my people. Who are those people? You click, there's a next tab over called Organizational Records at the top. You can see the full organizational profile of everybody who matched your search. And so just like the graphs, that can also be filtered. So if you're looking for advisors or project partners, you know, who else is doing early childhood water programs in my region? This is a great place to start to find some contacts and some connections. Plus, all the organizations that have responded to the survey are available in a directory that can be easily exported. So you can just select your search filters, scroll down to the bottom and click the export to get an easy Excel spreadsheet to use. Now, if you want to go over, we have a map, which is the next piece, is Climate Equity and Education Map. That's our other main tool for you to explore. So this tool can help you map EE providers, it can map public and private schools, as well as overlay a number of different climate and demographic indicators. They're going to help gather a more accurate understanding of the intersection between environmental education, climate, and social justice in the Southeast. And so if you get to this map, it is a GIS-based map. And so if you start with the little house icon up at the top, you can add all the see all the EE providers who responded to the survey. So all those orange dots that you're looking at on the map. You're going to go, hey, so that's EE providers. Let's look at schools. You can click those on as well. And you can zoom in and zoom out on this map to get as local or as big as you want. And if you have any kind of points on the map, just to hit that tip is that you can hover over any dot to see additional information. And if you want to see the information about everybody who's on your map at the same time, there is a additional details for each layer of the map that you can get to by clicking the arrow and sort of an arrow and line icon down at the bottom of the screen there, that'll pull up the attribute table so you can view really the whole scope at once based on your filters. And so that's the basic layers of like schools, EE providers. The school information was all stuff that was built from publicly accessible data sets. The EE providers that you're seeing are the folks who responded to the survey. But we actually took that information and then combined it with publicly accessible environmental layers, which are the globe icon up at the top. If you move over there, see that orange circle. And we have those lumped into 4 groupings. So you can filter for climate risks, pollutant sites like landfills and Superfund sites, energy, and food. And so like the current map that you're actually looking at right now is zoomed in on Kentucky, and those are Kentucky's tornado tracks. And so you can say like, how do environmental education providers line up with tornado tracks? What does this look like? And there are a lot of layers on this piece. And so we want to remind you that like in each section, if you see that the circle in the middle that's going up and down, you might have to scroll up and down to find them all for those environmental layers. We also have community layers, which is the little people icon up at the top. And that, again, was publicly accessible data that captures things like demographics and ethnicity, health, and infrastructure like parks and railroads. And so this particular example that you're looking at right now shows EE providers compared to levels of obesity in Kentucky. And so I want to pause right here and let you get looking at it. What do you notice about EE centers and obesity rates in this map, in this region? Why don't you share that in the chat? What do you see about this? Got less EE providers in areas with higher obesity rates. There seem to be lower levels of obesity in counties with more environmental education centers. Seem to be the 2 pieces that are coming up here. And so you can keep looking at these layers and drawing those conclusions. And this is at a bigger level. You can also look at, we've got another example prep for you here, which is about EE providers and the social vulnerability index. So those darker blue on this map, the darker blue indicates higher levels of vulnerability. And so if you look at this map, you might notice some similarities to the last one, right? With those conclusions that you were drawing. And so you can look at this at the big statewide level, like we've got here, or you can zoom into your local level and look at multiple layers at the same time. And so for this one, for example, is the city of Lexington, looking at food deserts, comparing poverty levels with EE providers. So again, remember those EE providers are the orange dots. So the areas in green on this map are within 1 mile walk to a supermarket. And the red dots are a measure of poverty. And so you can do this at your, whichever filters that you're interested in asking. And if you're like, okay, what am I actually looking at? There is an outline tab at the top. It's sort of that 3 little dots with the 3 little lines. And so you can turn that on to see what filters you're actually looking at the same time. And you can use these maps to answer any variety of your own personal questions that you want to know about your facility, your community, or whether that's work or home. And so you can zoom in, draw your own conclusions, and really ask a lot of these critical questions. And so this dashboard and this map are 2 of the tools that you can find in the landscape analysis hub, but there are a lot more. And so we're going to encourage you to go and look on the hub and explore, because if you're the kind of person who loves to dig into all the details, there's a 59-page full stakeholder report that summarizes all of the findings and our process and everything. We've got a story map. If you're a visual person, you want to see pulling up pieces as you scroll down. There are tutorials about how to use the tools and so much more. And so the links for these have been shared in the chat. I'm going to share it again here. And that's really the one place that you can get to explore it. Beyond what has been made just publicly accessible for these findings, we also have state level results that have been compiled and distributed to your state's Environmental Education Association. that summarizes really everything that's happening at your state region. So for example, in my home state of North Carolina, one of the recommendations was to address gaps in services found in our eastern side of the state, our eastern counties, particularly in the areas with the highest social vulnerability index, lowest income, but it also has the lowest population. And so that's an interesting piece for our EE association to really sit with and say, well, what can we do to help support this? What can we do as an organization? And that's a question that we don't have the answer to, but now that we have this piece to help sort of direct us and guide us in asking those really critical questions. And so if you'd like to know more about your state's specific results, please be sure to contact your state's NAAA affiliate. Because it's really what happens next with this data that's the exciting part, right? If you've been sitting through all this, and Susan, to your initial question of like, well, what about the schools? As Ashley mentioned, like this isn't the end. For us, phase one was that non-formal EE provider group. But we're really excited to announce that with some funding from the North American Association for Environmental Education, we can plan to begin phase two of this work, which is going to be focusing on those schools and school districts. So stay tuned for more information on that coming soon. And also, as you've been hearing through this presentation, there's still time to participate. If you missed the first round of surveys and want to be added to the dashboard or the map, or say a friend or colleague in your neighborhood that you're like, they're missing, and I know they do great work. This is the opportunity. And so you can get additional organizations and programs added to this database by submitting your information through the end of the month. So just about a week and a half left at that southeastee.com/survey. And we're really excited to have baseline data for the region. And ultimately, we plan to launch the survey with this survey and our school survey every 2 years so that we can compare trends over time. Because this is the snapshot of where we are now. What is the change that we're going to make in the world? And we want to be able to measure that. And so this is a really great tool that our region now has to be able to continue to ask that and to update and evaluate our progress. We're also communicating with other states and regions about the possibility of comparing data across the nation in a future State of the States report. And then I think I'm going to turn it over to Renee for what is SEEA actually doing with this information.
Thanks, Lauren. Yes, so it's not just, we've got this great tool now and we're pushing it out for people to share. It's really kind of continuing that what next idea. So SEEA has really used this landscape analysis to help us outline our strategic work plan over the next 4 years. So as a regional affiliate, this has really helped us internally focus on what actions SEEA as a regional affiliate can take to help build that bigger boat that we talked about earlier, to build that capacity and to really highlight the strengths and needs of environmental educators, EE providers, affiliates, and communities across our region. So just for example, strategies that will help SEEA achieve goal number 1 that's listed here are supported by action items, including developing toolkits and resources that will help states which do not have staff or limited staffing hours to share out those state-specific results of the landscape analysis within their states. So creating toolkits and documents that can be shared to help promote this tool and the findings within their state. We will also be developing EE guidance documents and advocacy toolkits for our SEEA states that will be focusing on equitable pay structures across the field and why it's important to collect demographic information in our programs and how that can help our field of environmental education. And then as Lauren also mentioned, this phase 2 of our landscape analysis that was mentioned, surveying schools across the region and how that will play into many of these strategies and their supporting actions. And just one more example too, I'm not going to share our whole strategic plan with you all, but just another example in our goal 2, where the landscape analysis is leading our work. Again, strategies supported by action items that are including those state-specific reports related to the findings from the landscape analysis, convening collective groups at the state and regional levels to discuss solutions for some of the gaps that we're seeing, and using the data to continue to identify trends. And again, toolkits and events like this webinar that help SEEA affiliate partners see and understand the data to help address those programming gaps that could be demographic, geographic, or topical. And again, looking to developing EE guidance documents and then toolkits to help states share them out. In this example, that we'll discuss equitable pay structures and a greater understanding of professional equity within the field of environmental ed, and all of this to help states share that information out to their state affiliate partners. So yes, time for questions again.
We do have a question from Will Freund, and I think we can maybe direct towards the hub and the toolkits, but what is a good elevator pitch for engaging new orgs in this analysis?
So that was basically what the video was intended to do, Will. So I think that that's a great tool if you're able to work. I mean, if you're working virtually, we've got blog posts and the video to share. But otherwise, I think we have a brief write-up on the website that just kind of briefly talks about what this was meant to do in a shorter paragraph form. That might be a great tool for sharing that. And then if there's anything else that you all need that you don't find on that hub, we're happy to put something together as well.
And then Amy Clark also had a question about a similar survey done through EcoRise in Texas. And I think Lauren actually found it and shared it, but of course, way to go, Lauren. But I wonder, is there a relation between those two surveys with EcoRise?
Yes, yeah, we worked in partnership. We actually contracted EcoRise. We worked in partnership with EcoRise in designing the survey tool because they had previously done a landscape analysis. And so we worked with them to mesh the data that we were trying to gather along with what they were doing in Texas. And we've created a joint tool that I think they're planning to use for their future iterations so that we'd be able to compare data across states. And then we also contracted with EcoRise in the development of the dashboard and the maps. So they'll look very similar.
What other questions?
Does SEEA include government funders? So we did have government agencies respond to the survey as one of the audiences. It wasn't specifically limited to funders. And I will say that most of the respondents were, folks that were located in the region, not necessarily, we didn't capture all the potential national folks that are serving the region, which is something we plan to do a better job of in the future.
And I'll also say that in looking at our strategic plan, since we are just working on some of these pieces this morning, there are conversations about a couple years out, reaching out to funders in the region and seeing where some of our interests, gaps and needs overlap. And so bringing in funders in that way.
Yeah, because that's been part of this design all the time is we started at the very beginning to say, we're not going to have one survey to rule them all. There's not going to be like one perfect survey that we're going to be able to get to every single audience that's going to perfectly mesh up with what they're looking for and what we're looking for. And so instead of trying to have this like huge, super complicated single survey, we're doing this in phases. And so as we've had phase 1, the providers, phase 2, the schools, and phase 3, the funders. And so we're trying to figure out like what are the other groups that we're missing in this. And I think we're going to continue to reveal those as this process continues.
So Chanda, your question about academic researchers who are interested in planning to use this data, I'm not sure at this point. This is, I mean, we've just launched, so I think there's a lot of opportunities there, and we would certainly be interested in exploring with that with anyone interested. We are working with Second Nature Trek, and they work at the university level to do some of the analysis we wanted to see. But I think, the thing, as we dig into this, we learn more and more like how much we haven't dug into yet. Like one of the things I was just thinking about this morning was we asked questions about the frequency and timing of programs. And there's a lot of research we could dig into there around, what is the exposure level that students are most often receiving versus what the research tells us is the ideal amount of exposure that they're getting, and being able to do some comparisons there. So I feel like we're at the tip of the iceberg right now with what we can do with this data. And there's a lot of opportunity here that we haven't even explored yet. All right, so Will asks, is there a plan to use this for advocacy? So that is one of the strategies in our new strategic plan, is to really dig into how can we use this to really look at, funding and advocacy, and then how can we at the regional level support state level policy work that's happening. And one of the things that you'll see if you want to go read the 59-page stakeholder report that we put together is that we did go out and look at some great things that were happening in other states. And we in that report, we highlighted 3 policy level things that other states were doing that we thought would be great opportunities for the Southeast. And so we did a little bit of a write-up on what that looked like and what it might look like to replicate here. And so there's a lot of opportunity for us to continue exploring that as well. Great, thanks, Amy. We're planning to start digging into the funder stuff later this year and thinking about what that might look like too. And thanks, Will, for reading that report. I'll be happy knowing one person read it. Just kidding. Any other questions? The submission period for the survey is currently open. So you can go to that link. We can share that again. Thank you, Renee. You can go to that link and submit. So if your organization is not currently listed in there and you're in our region, then we would absolutely strongly encourage you to go get that in there. It's not going to automatically populate onto our dashboard or our maps because we have to go clean the data and get it inputted in there. But for everyone who has responded since then, I think we've gotten another 20 responses since we launched. We will be getting that data in there in the next couple months. And we plan to update it every 2 years. Great question. So Rachel from Pisces, which we're really excited you could be here, Rachel, and thank you so much for your support in funding this opportunity. Wants to know if the survey will be leveraged in conversations with schools. So thinking of the schools being surveyed to connect them with partners for using ESSER funds. So I think that is going to be a huge opportunity. So we've been having conversations at the national level with some of our other state affiliates about releasing guidance for schools around ESSER funds and all the opportunities that are there. And so I think that this will just be one more amazing tool that we can use in those conversations to really help making those connections between schools and all the providers, and helping to facilitate those conversations and the opportunities that will open. Renee or Lauren, is there anything you would add to that?
Well, I guess other than to say that we're still in the early design phase of the school piece. And so we're still figuring out exactly what that looks like. There's a team that is convening now really regularly that's just on the survey design side. And so that's really where we're starting with. And I think that these questions of like, well, what can we do with this and how can we connect the pieces are really fascinating questions that I really look forward to. I think we all look forward to digging into as we're getting ready for like the rollout and like those next pieces.
Yes, absolutely. It's great to hear the ideas that people have because, you know, we want to make sure that we capture all of those in that piece. Thanks, Renee. Any other questions? Well, again, we just really want to thank the Pisces Foundation and the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation for supporting this effort and for all the amazing partners that came together and for all of you for participating in this project. And we're just really excited about the opportunities it's already given us and the future opportunities we haven't even tapped into yet, and really looking forward to continuing this work as a region. It's been amazing to be part of SEEA in its growth from the internal building block work that we've been doing for a number of years to really be digging into this external field building effort. And we couldn't have done it without all the amazing partners. And yeah, so we're just really excited to be able to share it with you all. And thank you for joining us today. And thanks, Laura, for sharing the guidance that was put together on the ESSER funds.